I'm Barbara Ireland, and I'm the programmer for our wonderful Madison Park Speaker Series. And as some of you know, every second Tuesday of every month from January through May, we have fantastic speakers like the one we have tonight. So I'm glad you're here. I'd like to welcome you to Lisa Port. She is a certified professional landscape designer. She's also a licensed architect and the owner of Banyan Tree Design Studio. Lisa creates custom landscape design projects that bring beauty, function, and joy into people's homes. And she specializes in dealing with sites that are challenging, like steep slopes or stormwater management, which I thought was really interesting. And Lisa's been doing landscape design and architecture for over 20 years. She's currently welcoming new clients, FYI. Please help me welcome Lisa Port.
Well, good. Thanks for all coming out tonight. I know it's hard sometimes with families and nights and things like that. Yeah, if you need to move to the center, we're going to turn the lights off here when I get started. But I just wanted to check in. Everybody kind of is in this neighborhood, is that right? You're all homeowners? Great, okay. So most of my work is residential design, and so it's geared, most of what you're going to see tonight are geared towards my projects and past projects. And some of the photos of the gardens that Kip and Octavia and I went through when we did our little pre-tour. So everybody knows about the garden tour coming up on May 18th?
May 18th.
Okay, it's
From
registration.
10 to 3.
10 to 3, okay, good. So that's the other thing, well, I have a couple slides in there that you'll see that aren't my designs, but they're on the garden tour. So, and I'll point those out just so that I don't mean to claim design. I know sometimes that can be a little touchy subject, so is that better? Can everybody see it? A little bit better. All right, so feel free to raise your hand, ask questions at any point. I'm happy to stop and do that. Otherwise, no worries. But I am gonna, I have a bunch of slides. I'll try not to talk too much. Anybody have any questions for starters? Okay, we're gonna get started. I'm gonna talk tonight about design. If these guys can go. What's this? Go. You were just going. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about design first because that's my brand. That's what I do. I'm design only. I work with skilled and qualified contractors for my jobs. But design is something that's deep in my soul, I guess. And it's always good to work with a designer if you can. If you have a complicated project or something where you're just not sure about, you want to work with design, thinking about the big picture, thinking about things that might not come across what you're thinking, but a designer can show some of the ideas that might be different than what you're thinking, give you a different idea how to move forward. So the first thing to think about that big picture is what your program is. What part of your design in your yard do you want to work on? What things do you want to include? Do you want a patio for entertaining? Do you want a new kitchen outside? Do you want a fire pit? Those kind of things will go into your program. Next thing you want to think about is a theme, and we'll talk about all these through the presentation, but a theme or a style. So this neighborhood is one of the most eclectic neighborhoods in all of Seattle. I think every other house is about this, like just a different style architecturally. And so that's a great place to start when you're working with the design to kind of look at your architecture. Next would be location and kind of what the big picture is in terms of where you are in the city, right? You have lake views, you have a vibrant, thriving pedestrian community here. And so those are the kinds of things you also might want to include in your design, moving forward with the design. Details, we'll talk about materials, we'll talk about plants at the very end. And then we'll also talk about features, things like fire pits and water features and art and things like that into the garden to make it a really great space. First thing you want to do is start with a site analysis. You want to look at your property, kind of hone in on your property and the properties surrounding you, right? You want to look for the views, you want to look at everything that is on your site, on your property, within your property lines, you want to look at and evaluate. We'll look at views, we'll look at the soil type, we'll look at Is it wet? Is it dry? Is it a site that has a lot of sun, a lot of shade? And work within those confines as much as possible. Couple other things we might want to think about, the zones, which we'll talk about too. The zone just changed in the U.S. hardiness map. So if you're not familiar with that, we'll talk about that a little bit. That comes up mostly with choosing and placing plants. And then again, genus loci, which means basically what is it about this community that you want to bring into your site, and what of your site do you want to contribute to your community? So that's another thing just to think about. As we move through a design process, and something we might do has anybody here worked with a designer before? Oh, perfect, lovely, great. So you probably know those experiences then, working with that designer, the first thing they do is kind of brainstorm. They think about all the things that you want, what you want in a space. Again, taking that program, those program elements that you want in your garden, and putting those on paper as you start to evaluate that site. You've already figured out where the views are, where you want screening and privacy. Now you start to develop that program, right? And it's a teeter-totter, what you want and what your budget is, and what you want and what your budget is. And so you go back and forth several times throughout this whole process, right? So, but it's also the fun part, because you can get onto Pinterest, get onto Houzz, go through your magazines, talk to your neighbors or your friends, like, oh, I really want a patio with that stone, or that kind of thing, and you start to develop all these ideas. So the brainstorming part can be a really fun and exciting part and time of the project. Again, looking through architectural styles and what you bring from your house into your garden is a great way to really start honing in on some of the ideas. Again, lots of eclectic houses in this neighborhood, and so you might not want to, if you have a contemporary modern home, you might not want a cottage garden in front. And, just trying to keep those things in mind makes for a better, more cohesive design in the end. So other things such as the garden style, the architectural style, and the garden style, hopefully those things get aligned and allow you to kind of have that cohesive design. I've also worked with great clients who are so whimsical and fun that you don't know what to expect when you go around the corner. So, and those are fabulous gardens as well. So, looking at going to other gardens, public gardens. Obviously, we've got the Arboretum, we've got the botanical gardens, we've got a bunch of different gardens that you can go to as well to research some of those ideas, plant combinations, where to put a bench, that kind of thing. As you move through the design process, we're looking now at schematic design. Things start to get a little bit more tight and kind of refined down as you go through the process. You eliminate ideas. Some things you're like, no, that's not going to work there because of whatever. Or you develop and say, no, that's the direction. I like this direction, but we're still working on refining those skills or refining those elements. We start to look at using design principles and art principles into the design so that things are not willy-nilly and decisions aren't being made based on nothing, but they have some basis. One of the first things that I really like to look at when I'm designing is the circulation in a space. It has to be functional. Even if the function gets hidden in the end product, the function, how do you get to the front door? What's the experience when you park your car and you go to your front door, side door, in through the garage? Like, how do you circulate through the space? Hugely important. And one of the first things that I like to lay out with any new design, so that that's like an underlying skeleton, and you have those bones in the space. It's really important, and not everybody thinks that's important, but I really think that's important. And because 6 months or a year later, when you're in that space, you're walking around, you don't know why it feels good, but then you'll go back and say, oh, because it was designed that way, and it intentionally designed that way. So circulation, and then what the front entry looks like, right? How people experience the front of the house, the front door, and how do they get to the front door? How does the UPS guy get to the front door? And how do your friends get there? And how do the dogs go in? And how do the kids go in? And in and out in that circulation, it's all very important and kind of one of the things you want to start with, right? And then we get to some of the fun things like adding in elements that make it really zing and pop and you can have fun with. So as you whittle that design down, you get to a place where you're like, okay, one design, I'm ready, this all looks good, we know what the materials are gonna be, we know what the plant material is going to be, we put that all on the plan at the end, or at the end of this process. It's really important that you walk into your space with your designer and understand the drawings. Drawings can be pretty complicated to read if you haven't had experience doing an architecture remodel project or if you've never worked with a designer. So it's important to understand what you're seeing and ask questions, right? And so it's really important too in some specific cases where you're building something, a deck or a fence or concrete walls or structures, overhead structures, any of that, that the drawings are accurate and that you are investigating if you need a permit, right? If something requires a permit, you should know it by the final design, and usually the designer should say, right? So that comes up with city jurisdictional, kind of where the sidewalk meets the property line, where you're building structures where it's a health, safety, welfare issue, potentially, critical areas, anybody here right on the lake, anywhere. Like there's houses right on the lake, and that's critical area, it's right away. If you have any water on your site, it's a critical area. So, you just have to jump through hoops. So it's good to know. You don't wanna get stuck later down the line having somebody stop the project, so. And then it's also good to, make sure you're sticking with your theme. You know, things can go crazy, the budget can go crazy, you can throw everything at a project, but it's good to kind of delete, and simplify, and, cause you can always add things later, so. So that's all good to know. And then as you're moving right along, you can see that a drawing that's articulated and dimensioned and specified, turns into reality, right? So the drawing, and it also provides information for the contractor to bid and price. So that's really important as well, because that is when near the end of the phases of the design process, you wanna have an installation done, right? That's the whole goal. Pretty pictures and lines on a piece of paper mean nothing. And so the installation is really what it's all about at the end. So, and I hope everybody can see these words, but, you know, we're talking about, working with contractors, whether that contractor is just a garden designer or garden installation company versus full landscape design or landscape installation crews, where they're coming in and doing all the work, they're doing the demo, they're doing, the stone work and the fence work and the, new deck, and they're putting out the plants and irrigation and all that kind of thing. A lot of landscape contractors are full, they do everything, right? They might have to hire an electrician, but a lot of them will do everything all on site. At this point, you wanna know what your budget is and really make sure that the budget is cohesive with the design and the drawings that have been created. Check again, make sure you don't need a permit for anything. There are plenty of places in our region for hiring a designer or hiring a contractor, groups that people can refer you to, that you can get referrals from. Never feel like you're alone. We have such a thriving garden and landscape community in Seattle and the east side and this whole area. Tons of designers, tons of contractors. We're really blessed, actually, to have all that resource with us. Ask your neighbor if they're doing a project, if you like the work, find those resources. Ask questions. We all know, or those of us who've done projects know that it can be a muddy mess, depending on when the installation's done. And you've got trucks and machines and form work and concrete and just a myriad of different folks. But when the end job is finished, it's usually a very beautiful space. And so this is, one of those examples where you put up with the mess for however long you have to put up with it, and then, and then you get that finished product. So these are just a couple of examples of work that I've done, where, we're forming up things during the project, and then you see the final end result. This was an entry that we did in Laurelhurst. Working with your contractor is really important. Those guys, they're not in your house, they're not as bad as building contractors, because those people are in your face all the time. Landscape contractors are better, they're the icing on the cake, really seriously, because they're outside your walls but having a good relationship with those guys is really important. Making sure the drawings are accurate, making sure that, the execution of the project is also accurate. Here's a couple during and after. These are really hard to see, but there's some big rock retaining walls and steel retaining walls up this hillside. And so, always have faith. Always know that when the rocks go in, because that's the first thing, all the hardscaping goes in first and everybody freaks out because it's like, oh my gosh, it's too much rock, it's too much hardscape, it's too much concrete, whatever. It's like, it's okay, it's plant magic is what we call it. And there will always be plants that we can hide. So again, big projects. This is actually in Madison Park. They definitely put in, this was the stonework that we did. And that process is ongoing. We do various types of, all the building materials, I think, we've had on certain projects, different projects. So push that envelope if you want. If you want to explore different things, you can always, there's stone yards out there, there's paving places, you can go look at samples, that kind of thing. But in the end,
And these are all residential, correct? All the examples? Okay.
Really beautiful stuff, Lisa.
oh, thank you,
Yeah,
thank you.
really impressive.
Yeah, so this was the final, the patio, the plants haven't grown in yet, they're fresh and new, but we did this, last spring, maybe a year ago, I guess now. So you just have to have patience, because sometimes the plants can take a while to get going, but, okay, and here's my shameless plug for, the garden tour. These are houses here in Madison, and that will be on the tour. Beautiful places that we visited, so if you get a chance to sign up, that's gonna be great. And Kip, everybody knows Kip is in charge of garden tour. So, yeah, so we toured these gardens about a month ago, I guess now, and there's Octavia over there, she's also part of this, she's the president of the Friends of Madison Park, so, and a colleague of mine, we worked together for many years. Anyway, so the last thing I want to talk about when you're talking about the design process, because you start from nothing, the site analysis, you design, you install, you spend lots of money, and incredible amounts of crazy money sometimes, but the last thing is maintenance, right? And keeping that garden maintained so that it thrives and is a benefit to your investment for a long time is hiring a good maintenance company. That's where your neighbors and your community, that's where you will thrive with those referrals. Gardening companies, maintenance companies are cyclical, some of them, and it's really good to find those people that you can have embedded in your garden for a long time, because they know it, they understand it, they know what you want, the look you want, and it's really important to have a good relationship with those maintenance companies. So, and they're the hardest ones, I think, to find. Like, it's hard to find a good maintenance company. So, get those referrals, because then you can enjoy your garden for a long time. And then, of course, you can have the party, and you can hire the caterers and the photographers, and you have all your friends, and you have a lovely garden party, and then, awards and published, and you get a new house, and, all of that moving forward. So, I've worked with clients on more than one house, right? Like, they've had a house, we did a garden, they decided to move, and we've done the next house. And the vacation house out on the Hood Canal, and so it's really fun when you start that process with the team. So, and enjoy your garden. So I just want to bring up a couple things here for the design tips and techniques that you might want to employ. And even if you're not doing some big, huge remodel landscape front and back, I think some of these ideas can be instituted into your garden and the design of that, even if it's just you working in your garden to install a thing, right? 3 different things I'm going to talk about today. There's a lot to choose from, there's a lot to show, but a lot of gardens and houses and landscapes use a rectilinear plan. diagonal to the house itself, or a circular kind of garden paths that meander through the space, right? So one of the things I want to talk about is changing that plan layout, okay? So that's one thing. The next thing is adding features and wow things that are really just like, oh my gosh, the thing you want to take the picture of. When you go on a garden tour, it's like, oh, that catches your eye. Because every time you will go through your own garden, you go, oh my gosh, I just love that piece of art so much, or whatever it is, the color, the water movement, those kinds of things. And then I want you to really think about using elements of art and principles of art to bring that cohesive design in. So even if you're not working with a designer, you can do that research, look at things that you might employ, like color and texture and form, line, shape, those kind of things. Even if you're just doing your own planting bed, think about those things instead of, when you leave tonight, nobody gets to buy one of anything, right? They have to buy plants ones or 3 at a time, or 5 at a time, or 7 at a time, right? So no onesie, okay, everybody? If you learn nothing else tonight, that's the thing. So here's a job that we did up in the north part of Seattle, kind of in the, what is that called, Wedgwood, I guess, ish area. And this was a tiny little house that was completely built from scratch, but and it was about 20 feet off of the property line, so the setbacks at 20 feet, you know, it was a new house, so they pushed it all on all the sides. But instead of doing that orthogonal porch, steps down, straight out to the sidewalk, we turned the plan. We made it a diagonal plan. And so the plan got rotated on I think it was a 30-60 on an angle, which made for some interesting angles and connection with the sidewalk. Those steel retaining walls, like where the house numbers are, is about 3 feet high. So when you're walking, you kind of have an edge, but it's not a wall that's gonna block the view. And behind those steel planters, to the next one too, behind these kind of zigzag steel planters are rain basins, bioretention cells. Because the house was new, we had to deal with stormwater code, and they needed rain gardens, basically. So what you don't really see is that we built up the walls, and then we put a big depression in it for all the rain to be captured. So instead of at the sidewalk level and then digging out a pit, we kind of elevated the front yard and then dug it out in there. So
So where did you dig behind the wall?
yeah, so behind that wall,
Okay.
which is, if you, let me see if I can do that here. Yeah, so as the stairs go up to the front door, and you know, the driveway ramps up to the
Right.
garage there, but it's about a 3 foot, 30 inches, I think, about a 3 foot,
Okay.
change in grade from the sidewalk up to the front door. And we use steel, and then we backfilled the steel, that upper terrace, with soil and made
But
it
then you had to
depression.
dig deeper.
Well, I mean,
What's
we-
a storm?
Yeah, so it's so a bioretention cell basically is capturing your stormwater on site so that your downspouts and, you know, if you have a big driveway, it can drain off into that. But we were capturing stormwater runoff in those bioretention cells. And then that just allows the stormwater to percolate down into the soil instead of flash flooding out into, you know, out into the street. And if you're building a new house, it's required on every house, I think, at this point.
So what is this plant that's hanging over the edges like the?
That is the, Euphorbia, not Mercenites, I know this, it's donkey tails birch is what it's called. It's a euphorbia. It's harder than heck to find, but it's super cool because it has the stem and then the leaves come out and they rotate. They're like a Fibonacci sequence kind of thing where the leaves rotate on the stem. It's very cool.
Yeah.
It's Euphorbia, it's not Mercenites, but that's the really basic one. You can text me and I'll tell you what it is. I don't come from horticulture, I come from architecture, so sometimes I have to have all my books out, all my everything to get, but I know what it is, and it's a great, up against that recipe, really great, boy, pops, really good. So here's a diagonal plant in the backyard. Skinny new house, that, the developers put in, 3 of them right next to each other, make long skinny backyards. And I'm like, okay, this is gonna be super boring if we just do straight out and straight back. So I introduced this plan, showed her this plan for, this water feature. She really liked the blue, so what you're seeing, it's hard to see with the slides here, but, the water feature kind of starts down the bottom of the screen. You can kind of see it from drawing a little bit easier, where this is is a big chunk of stone with a fall, and then it goes into a rill, goes out and to that back basin. And so, here it is in real life, once it was installed. So that rill, and then we powder coated the rill and basins, this beautiful turquoise blue. And so and again, it's a skinny house, but it's like 3.5 stories tall.
So like a trench drain going through the middle?
But it's an open rill, like you can see the water going down through, the middle of the patio. And because it's only like, 4 inches wide, I suppose it could be a tripping hazard, sure, somebody could step in it, but, right here, we put 2 pieces of stone that squeezed it together, so that, there was less likely possibility of that. But these pictures are from the roof deck, so it becomes, like, you're not just looking out into the garden, but you're looking down on it, like it's a drone photography in a way. And so the geometry is really important, right?
The house is not at the diagonal.
No, the house is straight.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the house is like this, and then you could.
That's right. And what happens in a if anybody has like a long skinny side yard that's like 10 feet long, or a skinny backyard that kind of, super skinny, doing a diagonal plan, or I'm gonna show you the angular plan, it makes that space feel bigger. It's weird. I've done it several times now, but anytime you have a long bowling alley type space, the diagonal plan makes that space like double in size. It's just a weird thing. So an angular plan is another option for changing up that rectangular plan layout and, working great in small spaces, which some gardens that we have in Seattle are really tiny, like they're just, they push the houses right up to the edges. This is a 15-foot, front yard setback in Green Lake, and, here you can see kind of the top of the photo, that's the sidewalk, and then a huge parking strip, but, people, dogs, all the time, everywhere. And the thing they hated was sitting out in their front yard, which is, in this particular, infill project, that was their only yard. They didn't have a backyard, they only had the space, and they wanted to sit out there, and it was like, but we hate, like, being on display, right? So we came up with a fence that has slats, and so you can see movement behind the fence, but you're not like looking in, right? And because we set this plan on the angular, it wasn't like you were looking straight through the slats, right? You were kind of twisted, and what happens with an angular plan like this is that you can develop those corners and they're bigger planting areas, instead of just like a U-shaped plant bed. So it really, when you're in the space, you can see movement through those slats, but at the same time, you're pretty private. And then we picked plants that were evergreen, the bamboo, we did raised planters and things like that, so it helped.
Is it always a more modern design when you do that angular thing, or?
That depends, exactly, you're right, it can be, but I think that with the elements like this, trellis, and the house here was an infill, so it's more of a contemporary modern look to it. And so the arbor you see is a little bit more in the same style. If it was a craftsman, say, or a traditional house, you'd really have to play with the elements to keep it, like the fence design and the arbor, to make sure that you are not deviating. I think you could still do an angular plan, but it's all the other bits and pieces that I think really have to tie it together. So I wouldn't say you couldn't do this in a traditional house, but you just have to be a little more careful. So, okay, so the next big tip that I want, so that's the first thing, changing the plan layout was kind of one thing you could do to change things up. The next thing I want to talk about are some fun bits and pieces that you can add into your garden. So I love a black fence. One of my favorite fences is to stain a fence black. I think things, colored plants really pop. And if you wanted to go with a bright colored furniture, you're really getting that with the fence. So elements, anything that you can bring into the garden that you love. I don't care what anybody says, no designer, don't listen to them, have a thing you love. because that's what makes that garden yours. So I think it's really important to consider that. If you're at a loss and you wanna, you know, have something to draw from for your design inspiration, use your architecture first, the community second, and choose the hardscape and plant choices that enhance that theme, right? So, and we all know contemporary designs are really like fields of grass, or fields of this thing, or fields of that, they're all like block planting. Cottage gardens and sweet little houses are gonna have a different style, right? They're gonna be the roses and the delphiniums, and, you know, you're choosing plants that enhance that architecture, where you can draw from that. So, we're gonna talk about some features. First thing I like to work with is the entry sequence, right? Your front door. That's Kip, he wouldn't smile for me at all. He was just like, I'm not smiling.
I didn't even see the picture.
So, his house is so sweet, it's super cute. I saw these are two Madison Park Gardens. I don't know the owners, this was just from the street, right? This first one, but super cute, like that gate and the house, it's not a very wide lot, as you can see, it's not a very wide house, but they offset it, it's asymmetrical, and you're not coming up where Kip's house is more symmetrical, but it's balanced, because it's not everything, it's not matching exactly the same, but I'm gonna talk about that in just a minute. The first one though, even the house numbers are off kilter. See that, the house, the way they put these house numbers at an angle, everything is kind of asymmetrical, which means that it's not, if you drew a line down the center, both halves are not the same, right? If it's a symmetrical design, you draw the line and it's both halves are the same. If you look at the picture on the right, the boxwood, the lights, the steps up, the door, the two bigger pots, all the same, right? But adding a little bit more of his own garden flair, we've got some sculpture, the crow, and another pot on the right-hand side, and then the sconce and the house numbers on the left-hand side. It balances super great. I mean, the balance is perfect. So it's symmetrical, mostly, largely, that's what drives that design bit right there at the front entry. But then there's the balance that comes in with the other added things. So I think that's a really important thing. This is a garden I did on Mercer Island last year, a couple years ago. And we've added a bunch of different features. There's an outdoor kitchen, there is dining space, outdoor kitchen, and then if you turn around in the garden, there's an area with seating and a fire feature. They've also got a little water feature that I will show you as we move through. I'll talk about that. But again, black fence, you've got some art in there which adds color pop in the space, and the wife really loves these huge containers full of all the colors. She loves the hummingbirds and just wants all the colors, and so we really use the black fence as kind of the calm, the you know, tone it down just a little. But then it all hangs together because the furniture is gray or black, the covered bit over the kitchen area is all powder coated black, the fence is black, and this is a new planting, so the plants are still quite small, and then the concrete helps to tone everything down as well. So, and then she's got planters all around, and like this one here in the front with the bright pink fuchsia, you know, geranium that is just a great pop of color, right? And she did all the containers herself, so that was really nice.
Is there like a covering above the?
Yeah,
kitchen?
yes,
Or
this
what
is
that
glass.
made of? What?
Yeah, that's glass. Yeah, it's not plexiglass, it's a tempered glass on this one. Yeah, not cheap, but it's easy to clean and won't break, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, the tree
Or
would
if it
fall.
broke, it would be in tiny pieces.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not gonna send chunks of glass hanging there. But yeah, we had that fabricated with the metal fab place and wanted a little cover over the barbecue area. Yeah. Makes it super functional year round, which he really liked. That was what he wanted. So, yeah, this is a long rectilinear kind of front yard, and I showed them the diagonal plan, and she's like, no, it has to be all open. I want to be able to see the fence and from the kitchen that's big window over here, over on the far side there, that's the kitchen, and she wanted to be able to see all the way through. So I was like,
Is that the front yard, the kitchen?
It is the front yard.
So you walk
yeah.
through that to the front door.
Well, it's weird, it's one of those weird houses where you have the driveway and the garages, then you have that house, front door, and then there's a fence, that comes all the way out, and then you go in the gate, and that's the front yard.
Oh.
And so we really had to separate the, getting to the front door versus the private space of going through the gate. And I'll show you the gate, because the gate's in here just a little ways down. So again, adding appealing elements that you want in your space. How do you entertain? How do you like to hang out? We do a lot of fire features that are gas, and we do some that are wood burning. That's a huge question, do I wanna be able to flip the switch and turn it on and have a gas, and then add my glass of wine, and then 20 minutes later I'm in the house? Do you like to make a fire, and the whole process of making the fire, and getting the wood to burn, and having marshmallows and flavors and things like that? That could be a different family vibe that you want, and so that's a whole different process. But still, if you have big rocks, if you have water features, if you have fire features, these are things that draw people in, right? You don't have a lot, I suppose that Madison is a pretty busy road, but some people live on bus lanes, they've got the bus right outside their front gate, or an elementary school across the street, those kind of things, and a small bubbling water feature that gives you a little internal focus and internal noise in your garden space can drown out, no matter how many buses go by, or if you live right next to I-5, it can bring that focus right in and help the space feel a little calmer. So this is a steel water feature we put in. All that green on top is that little leaf plant that grows in water, and you can scoop it out of the ditch and put it in a water feature like this, and it populates. And because we had the little bubbler, the bubbler made that circle. And so I was like, I visited one day to take pictures, and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at that, so cool. It just happened that way. So they scooped it out, they got this little green plant that grows, where the ducks are, and put it in the top of their water feature, so that was really fun. Fire features, they're great for drawing families in. This is a house in Broadmoor, where we did the backyard, and the backyard was meant to be similar to the San Juan Islands. And so we have gravel, and we have this big basin that we made into a fire feature. We put the beach chairs around it, and it's on the golf course, so it is completely surrounded by mega hedges, because the golf course is right on the other side, but they don't want to see it. So we've got this big, but in the other photo, which is hard maybe to see, but there's a bench, and then right in front of that, that's a steel fire feature as well. And it's a great place for the family to, little thing right there. So we built a built-in bench, we have rock work, and this lower patio from the house, and fire, boy, if you want a gathering space, the fire will do it. You could, even on like tonight, it's not raining now, but it's cold out, right? And going out and just turning a fire on is one of the best things we have available to us. Color with plants, color with furniture, color with your umbrellas and your cushions, things like that. Even if you want kind of a monotone garden with plant material and your hardscape materials, you can always change out umbrella color, cushions, even some furniture, like those red chairs I showed you a little bit earlier. This is the same client, but two different houses. One was in Sammamish, the other one was in Redmond. And boy, we had quite a refined room and board, what was it? The furniture she got all had some green barrel, I think, originally. And it was all very kind of monotone. And then she grew up a little bit and bought a place in Redmond. And boy, her plant choices changed. We did color and vibrancy and bring in the hummingbirds, and it was so much fun just to see the growth process of her choices over the years. So color can be great. Here's that same garden. This is the skinniest garden I've ever done. This was the house, the picture on the right-hand side with the 3-story condo. Between the side wall of the condo and the fence to the side yard, 8 feet. Actually, it was like 7 foot 8 inches. Like, it was skinny, right? And so diagonal plan, I use a diagonal plan, you can see that the deck and kind of how those planters work all coming into the space. That little metal panel down in the floor, that's an in-ground fire feature, so they can lift it off like a lid that you have in the street to get into whatever. They lift that lid off and they light it with the, so they have a little fire. Two guys out there in their red chairs, and then right behind us in the second photo there is their little barbecue. I don't think I've ever seen a smaller barbecue, I swear to God, it's like this, it's like this big, and we made a little space for it to sit year round, so small gardens are in Seattle, they exist, and they're super fun to work in, I think. And color. So here's some water features that, I've done in the past. We've, done ones that are big and splashy and, vibrant and have a lot of energy to it. I've done creeks, down through a property which bubble and gurgle and that kind of thing. And then I've done super meditative, kind of quiet, reflecting pond type thing. So water can change a space if you want it to. It can be a very loud rushing stream, it can be a big water feature that spreads all over, or it can be just a simple dish rock that, that the birds get into and it's very calm. So those are features that you can bring into a space that really adds some character. Other things that exist, again, color, but the picture with the red fence has the house and this is over in Ballard, and they did along one whole side of their property on a public sidewalk, a metal fence that was all cut in this panel. So those pieces of gray that you see at the top, that's steel, that have been fabricated to sit on top of this red solid wall, basically at the back of the property. And you can see it from all the bedrooms and all the house that look down into the garden. It's a huge feature. There's a picture on my website at night with the string lights and everything. It's just really, really a great space. And then of course it can be as simple as a broken pot that's artistically arranged, and that's Kip's garden as well, so in his backyard. So great to just utilize those things and reuse those spaces for just a little bit of art. Not a red wall, if that's what you want or need, but pieces of beauty regardless. It is important, again, I can talk about themes and styles and how you might use that for inspiration. I really do think that the architecture is sight one, like that should drive the boat. Especially if you have a house with a distinctive architectural style, right? Some houses, you're like, what style is that, or what are we calling this, or, and actually in those particular gardens, you can go in certain directions that you want to go, right? You're not beholden to the architectural style, which can be fun as well. And then the garden style or the garden theme can be pretty much whatever you want, right? We've got gardens for play, we've got gardens for meditation and calm and restorative. We have places where we want to entertain our friends and have big family dinners on Sunday. It can be super minimal, it can be not every client, I swear to God, every client wants low maintenance. I don't care what kind of style they have or what they want, it's always low maintenance. Every single person says low maintenance. So we have to really be careful with those two words. They're thrown about really easily, but low maintenance means different things to different people, and so you really have to understand, because that goes back to hiring a maintenance company for a lot of my clients. They don't have time, they have kids, or they have busy jobs or whatever, and it's just a lot easier and long run has better outcome when you have a maintenance company doing it. So, there's lots of different, but I do think that when you have a house with a lot of style, it is important to draw on that style. So these are, again, that house that we did in Broadmoor. There's a lot of metal work. It's obviously a big house, and it's a Spanish exterior, so it's all stucco. And they had a real affinity for French gardens, so we did a lot of metal and scroll work and fancy. What you're looking at under there is the rose arbor, and under that they played pétanque, and so it's kind of a double surface. If you look down that alley of the rose arbor on the right-hand photo, to the right of that is where that big rock fire feature was. And, the beach, basically, was the beach. And then, lots of different spaces in this garden. It was an amazing project. I had so much fun. Great finds. This is a houseboat, roof deck. This was a new houseboat, new house, they're not called houseboats, I think. They're
Floating home?
Floating home, thank you, that's the current terminology. I've lived in Seattle a long time, and so I've always loved the floating houses, or houseboats, but anyway, this was a brand new build, this is the roof. All those black containers, 42 of them on this floating home, 42. Because what they did, these tall skinny planters, they filled them halfway with rock, and they were the ballast of the whole house. And so it was amazing, like, we had to come up with, okay, how are we gonna do it? Because obviously continuity was important. Imagine 42 containers with different plants, like every container being different. Like, we had to really do this whole bed in containers. And containers are, we're gonna talk about that, but, you know, they wanted a little bit of color. The grass up there is turf, it's not real grass. But there's different spaces to sit, there's the grill, there's the dining, there's the hangout space with the little fire pit up there, and that's where they climb up to watch, you know, the boats go by and the planes land and all the kind of husky stuff.
Did you have to think about the weight of the?
That was the balance, yeah, it was
But
all
just
engineered.
But even the weight or the balance, but also the actual weight. like-
Yeah, and that wasn't me, that was the engineer,
Oh,
that was like
yeah.
somebody else did that. They just said to me, by the time it got to me,
Yeah.
was, we're gonna have all these containers,
Yeah.
please fill them. But we took a barge, they had, everything was on a barge, cause this was the house way at the end of the dock. And so the only way to bring everything in was by barge, so we loaded up all the plants, all the soil, all the, everything, in Ballard. You floated it all through the lake, so this is out in Portage Bay. And yeah, the weight was the critical thing. Yeah, a floating home, I don't know if you've ever been in one, they are the coolest things. If you ever, as a Seattleite, if you've been here a long time, if you ever just walk down through the docks, is there, you could do that? Oh my gosh, the first time I did that, I've been here all my life, and I did that, like, when we were, this is maybe 2019, so right before COVID. And the people are so sweet, they'll talk your ear off, and there were some amazing plants growing where you would never expect plants to grow, including 42 containers on this. And yeah, when they're new, you spend a lot of time trying to get that balance of the house just right, so that the cabinet doors don't swing open, and the things don't roll off the counters, and it's a totally different lifestyle. It's really cool though. Okay, this is just a simple project in West Seattle, but again, these little spaces and these little elements make all the difference. The chairs match, the cushions there, they match the plants. You know, you've got some continuity with color going on, so that's always intriguing. Again, this is that Broadmoor house, so you see this is the front door. This is where you come through those double gates, and there's this huge new water feature, and then you have the green columns on the front of the house. And I was blessed because those gates were in existence, but when the orientation of the house before the front gate was those green columns. Italian cypresses were there, but those gates were not directly straight out from the house, they were over on the side. And when you went through one gate, you ended up on a path that was like 2.5 feet wide. I mean, it was so ridiculously underscaled that it was just, it's like, okay, we're changing all that. So we had the doors refit, the gates refinished, and we built that arbor, and put in the water feature and made it grand. You know, we made it, the landscape tie in with the architecture. So I think it's important. So back to containers. Containers are those little things that you, as homeowners, can play with, right? You can pick your style of container, you can pick the plants, you can pick the location, and usually it's one of those things that you can do throughout your garden. It can all be the same. They can be totally eclectic, right? So the blue turquoise is steel that we have powder coated, and it's in front of this big house. The other planter that you see up on top of that column is, where were we? I think that was back in Michigan somewhere at on a garden tour. But those containers, steel urns up on top of that, like, you can imagine the rest of the gate, right? Like, that was probably 10 feet up in the sky. So, but containers can be real focal points too. And this neighborhood is fantastic for that. You just take a little walk and see everybody's different containers on their front porches, just like the ones we saw in Kids Grove. Here are another couple of gardens that you'll see on the garden tour. Planters or garden containers don't have to be filled with plants. They can just be beautiful in and of themselves. They can be pieces of art, like we saw under the tree earlier. They can flank a front door, and this is probably a more symmetrical, perfectly symmetrical flanking, using the containers for drama and getting to the front door and seeing that, okay, they're directional, right? They help you get to where you're supposed to go. But they can also be super flamboyant and full of different colors, like we saw in that garden with the black fence, this pop of color. I love the huge foliage, especially in a small space, because I think it makes the space feel bigger. Just because you have a small space, if you have a small space, doesn't mean everything has to be small. In fact, when you go into a small space and you make something big or overscale, especially with foliage, it can make the whole space feel bigger. So containers are great places to experiment with all different kinds of plants. And they don't have to be all hardy and all, like, you can go on the edge of plant life in our city and plant those things that are a little bit marginal, right? They might die. Because then maybe you do bring them into the garage or whatever when we know we're gonna have cold. Or maybe you just say, well, that was a very expensive annual, and I will deal with my, I'll buy new plants next year. So, this is a failed water feature. It was supposed to be this water basin with like a drippy wall, and one of those things that was just like, all right, that's not gonna work the way we had hoped. And so the owner, she's like, well, we're gonna do something different. So every year, we come in and do a stage set, basically, where we bring in plants that have this tropical kind of flair to them, and I bring in all kinds of stuff that when I come back the next April, it's mush. It is like nothing left, except that gunnera. That gunnera lives in a pot that's not very big, and it's been there for years, and it's massive, and so that's the scale. This is probably a, 6-foot planter, which should have been the water basin, right? It should have been like where the water went into, but we just fill it with plants every year and make this like stage set. It's super fun. I love doing that with her. All right, so I want to deviate just a little bit from these other plants and photos to consider the environment a little bit with our birds and our bees and our dogs. I want to encourage everybody to think about the bigger picture of the space we live in and how our individual gardens are impacted in the broader environmental site that we have. So dish rocks, places for water and for food, natural food sources. Bird feeders are great, but they attract rats. And so if you can provide plant material that has natural food sources and shelter, right? And so that example over there is what's called an insect hotel, and these are some of the considerations that we just want to think about. Where our dogs go and where they shouldn't go, that's a big thing. Providing food sources. Please try and avoid any chemical on your property. If you can do natural, if you can go out with your clippers and clip the slugs in half instead of pouring toxic chemicals on them, I think we're all in a better place. I know it's gross, but everybody here in Seattle should at least once snip a slug in half and just deal with it, because that's what we have. So this last week, I had the benefit, I had this fern table that I created last year. And as I was kind of poking around in there and cleaning it up, these are succession photos, I don't know if you can see this, but I was trying to kind of clean up under there. And under that big leaf fern, I started to pull out this dead leaf, and then I realized it was like wrapped in a circle, and I'm like, what is that? And then I see those 2 eggs. And I mean, we're so close to Easter, I'm like, oh, it's an Easter basket. And I went in to like grab the Cadbury egg out of it, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's a real egg, like, don't touch it. And it was a junco, and at that point, I'm hearing these birds just freaking out that I'm so close to their nest. But what I found in there were 2 eggs, that I saw, and I'm standing back with my phone, kind of zooming in faster and faster to see, get farther and farther to see these little eggs. My daughter went out 2 days later, and she's like, where's the net, where is it? And she's like, is there 2 eggs in there or 4? Because there's 4 in there now, so I'm like, oh my God. So right now we have 4 babies coming, we have 4 little babies, I'm so excited, I can't. So it's so great when you develop a space in your garden that they come to. Like that's one of the benefits of really creating a space for birds and bees and dogs and all the other guys, right? Like rabbits and deer kind of can be a nemesis, I know. It can be, the rabbits right now are out of control. If we can have more coyotes and more owls, we are in good shape, so. But it was so great to see this, and it's just so fun to have a bird's nest that close, because it's really like right at eye level. This is the dog gate that I was telling you about. So these dogs are so funny in that black fenced garden. This is the side gate that gets you into that bigger patio space. They have this French bulldog, and then they have the daughter who comes and goes a lot, has a super hyper lab mix something. But as you can see, they're taller. Like the French bulldog is about 12 inches off the ground, and then the other one towers over him and looks. We needed to build a gate that they could both see out of. So that's the little slot in the gate that they can stand. And I'm sorry, the pictures don't probably realize this, but you know, when we can design little crafty things like that that's really fun. Dish rocks, super easy water feature. Like probably one of the easiest, simplest, inexpensive ways to bring water into the garden. It can be passive or active, but the dogs like to use it as a dog dish. The birds will get down onto the lip and the edge, and it could be that little feature in your garden that brings a little bit of water and habitat.
Lisa?
Yeah.
Are there any self-cleaning bird baths? Because I'm not very often at my house.
Self-cleaning, I don't think so. Like, again, that's a garden maintenance thing, so if you have a maintenance company doing any maintenance, they can take a stiff brush. And the dish rocks are great though, because if they don't have any kind of mechanics in them, they're naturally a basin. They'll fill up with rain, or if they're next to the irrigation, they can be filled up with irrigation, like during the summer.
Yeah.
But, you know, if they dry out, it's just kind of like a little crusty on the rock, which doesn't look bad because it's already brown and that color.
Right.
You know, anything that's like a manufactured bird bath really probably should be cleaned because they're using it and you don't wanna kind of, have any diseases with the
Yeah.
birds and things like that, so.
Okay.
It is important, if you're putting up feeders and those kind of things, especially in the summer, you have to clean them. If you're putting out hummingbird feeders filled with the sugar in the summer, oh my gosh, like regular cleaning. Like, otherwise the stuff can grow and it just makes the birds sick and it's just not good. So if you're not there, then I would probably not use those things
Okay.
as much, yeah. So, okay, plants. And I know we're getting there. I have a few more or photos to show you about plants. And I'm not gonna give you like best of, cause the lists are huge. And again, huge gardening community, tons of places to go for resources for plant material in our community. Do any of you guys belong to NHS or any other garden clubs? Yeah, so public gardens that we have, tons of research, they're all on QR codes, you can go with your phone, you can do all the research in the garden. You know, I like that plant, what is it? There's apps you can get to do all that stuff, and it's getting too dark this summer, but, yeah.
Do you have this, on this one, it says Pacific Coast Iris, do you have any tips on finding those?
And I'm not telling you. No, they're super hard to find, they are, and some of the plant sales that are going on right now, the different plant groups will put those on, like the King County Master Gardeners have a big plant sale, the CUH will have Center for Urban Horticulture will have plant sales, and it's hit and miss, and if you see some, just buy one, so that everybody else has a chance to have one. No, I bought, the wholesale nursery just, I don't know, last week, she had like a whole thing of them, and I called my contractor, I'm like, we need these for our job, and I needed like 3 or 4, not very many. And he's like, okay, have them put 20 aside for me. And I was like and I said, where did you find those? The nursery owner wouldn't tell me. And she said, they'll be gone, like, in 3 days. Like, they're really hard.
Talking about hostas or the.
At the top, there's, it's an iris,
Oh.
but it's the native iris. And, so, yeah, it's hard to find, and when you do find it, probably not at Swanson's, and probably not at, the nurseries, you'll find it at these smaller one-off plant sales. You don't see it. But keep looking and keep trying, because they're beautiful, and, I'll show you a picture here, this next one, that's a Pacific Coast iris, and they come in all variety of color. Most of them are purple, sometimes you can find these beautiful, they're just so obviously, when you're choosing plants, there's a lot of things to choose from, right? You can go to greatplantpicks.org, greatplantpicks.org, and that's a great list of all the different, trees, shrubs, perennials, ferns, grasses, vines, that kind of thing. That's a great resource, because it's local, and usually the plants that they list on their plant list are available, usually. But you need to look at making sure that, what am I talking about? Look at the soils, right? Look at the sun and the shade and where you've got those things. Those are huge, important things that you do in your site analysis when you're looking at your site, way back in the beginning. Function, I always like, because I come from architecture, I use plants as a functional thing. Like, I want them to do something, not just be pretty or color, which is also important, but I like them to screen, or I like them to be directional, like they're moving people, or those kind of things. So function is important to me. We all love native plants, right? We all love native plants. Native plants can be super unruly in a small garden in Seattle. Like, maybe 1 varieties, not 10 of them, right? Because they want to be out in nature, and usually our urban sites don't have the space to accommodate a ton of native plants. Native plants every day. If you can find ferns, if you can find vines that are native and attract our native pollinators and our native birds, that's great. But also at the same time, you don't want the rabbits to like them. So, again, Google search for plants that, do these different things. We have a ton of authors that have put out books and magazine articles and all that kind of stuff that you can find that information. We could do 3 lectures just on plants and not even get close. So lots of things to consider. I just want to touch really briefly on the hardiness map that just changed. We went from kind of a 7A, 7B to a 9, which basically means, and this is a lot of words, I know, but basically the zones that we're dealing with in our region are 7 to 9, and what that zone number means is the lowest temperature that it typically gets to, right? So zone 9, just for instance, zone 9 is a low degree, they base it on the lowest average temperature, 20 to 30 degrees. So you go out and buy every plant in your garden as a zone 9, and we have a winter like we just had, everything will die, right? Everything is gonna count because that's too high. And a lot of the nursery owners are like, what are you talking about, zone 9? So really, I would probably stick with the plants that are in like zone 3, which is super cold, but some of our hostas and our daylilies are rated zone 3, and so you're safer with those plants. Buying things that go down in zone 5, zone 7, right? When you start to buy a plant that's like zone 8 or zone 9 or 11, like some of us do, they're tender, which means in the winter, like when we have a January, like we just did, and it got super cold, it was at freezing or below freezing, you're bringing those plants inside. You are putting them in your garage, which nobody wants to do when it's freezing out, right? Like that is not what you want to do. Unless you've invested a ton of money and like you have to bring it in, right? So you put it in a pot with casters on the bottom so you can wheel it into
So
your.
3 to 5, would you say?
Yeah, 3 to 7 is probably safe, but this new zone, we're now saying we're in zone 9. And so if you go out and buy everything that's a zone, rated a zone 8 or zone 9 or 10 or 11, they call that zonal denial. And there are certain people that really push that, bananas can be hardy here. We have some bamboo and palm trees that will grow here, not all of them though. So you really have to be careful when you're looking at plants, or just know that they're at risk, so. There's a lot of new information, a lot of articles, because this just changed, so you can do some Google searches. Here's a good list of plant resources, so when you're looking for plants, if you like to research stuff. Otherwise, you can go to the nursery and ask, right? And I know city people's clothes, but that's like a big, and now it's like heartbreaking, right? But
So subject around here,
what's that?
so subject around here.
Yeah, right. So, but we do have a lot of public gardens, right? And lots of knowledgeable people. Again, if you're just doing a planting bed, call or find a garden designer that just does garden coaching, or just does plant bed design, or can work with you to pick select plants. Or do it yourself and pick, read the tags, do your research, make a good investment. Don't buy one of everything, right? One specimen tree, 3 plants underneath, or 5 plants, or a field of plants, like 7 plants, like the odd numbers. Everything just looks better. Unless you're doing symmetrical, then you gotta give that makes a little sense. I advocate so many communities have their garden tours, right? Woodinville has a great one, Lake Forest Park has a great garden tour, Madison's gonna have theirs on May 18th, and you can sign up with Kim. And so a lot of our communities have those, and they're great because they're local, right? And so you can really see what grows well in somebody's garden. And then we have a ton of roofs. So here's just a sampling of a few things that I like. I have them in my clients' gardens. Witch hazels, which are color and fragrance in January. Our pine trees and Camphocypress, which are like the Hinoki cypresses. Those are great evergreen conifers, small. Usually you can find small ones for smaller gardens, so you're not planting a 200-foot tree in our small areas. Here's a combo of plants that I really like because there's texture, there's color, there's fragrance, they're evergreen. Well, redwood dogwood is an evergreen, but the foliage that comes out in the summer is just really cool. So this is the vibe you want to start with though, where you're doing combos. Like try and find plants that go together, that work well together, that hit 3 or 4 seasons of interest, right? Like pick the thing that really has a lot of interest, multiple interest levels, color, fragrance, texture. You can eat something off of it, like our native evergreen huckleberry, which is it's a broadleaf evergreen, so it doesn't lose its leaves. Berries that you can eat in the summer. It works or functions like a boxwood, like you can hedge them and make them into balls or into hedges, or just let them be native. The pollinators like them. We can eat the berries. They're great in our sunshade, like perfect. I love that plant.
What was it?
Our evergreen huckleberry.
Wow.
It's a Vaccinium ovadum. So, yeah, it's a great plant. Multi-use plant. So that's the kind of thing. If you're choosing for an area, try and pick something that has more than just one interest, right? Unless you're doing containers and you just need some annuals from Fred Meyer or whatever. Okay, workforce perennials. If you're, again, buying a perennial, don't buy a fussy one. Buy one you can put in the ground, water it occasionally when it's established. You don't have to water it at all, and it just goes from May to September or October and doesn't stop. And the Rudbeckia, there's a couple of varieties of the Rudbeckia tall, they're all yellow, most of them. But those are the kinds of perennials that come back every year that are a good spending of your money, right? If you're buying everything as annuals, you're gonna do that same thing every year, which is great for some things, it's fine, but really if you're investing in your garden and you just wanna do it once, then that's really the best way to do it. Pick things that, if you're gonna put in the sun, can really take, our summers are hotter and drier, and water is not an infinite resource. So keep that in mind. Buy things that say drought tolerant or, that are gonna survive without a lot of water, additional water. Okay, ferns, I love ferns. Ferns are ground cover, they're interesting. than just our native sword fern. I love native sword ferns, I think that they're hugely, you can buy native sword ferns and put them on the back slope, and they're a great ground cover. They are evergreen, they take hardly any maintenance, but they're boring. Go on a hike, go to Tiger Mountain, see all the sword ferns you could ever have want in your whole life. In your yard, where you're walking on a path and you're seeing that fern, it's evergreen probably. There are a lot of deciduous ferns that can be cut back, but there's so much, this is the same family, the Polystechum, as our sword fern, but the color, the fronds, the texture is so much more refined, just so much more refined. So pick a nice fern. There's so many out there too.
And these are evergreen ones?
This one is evergreen, yeah. And of course, everybody knows the ferns in, in our native areas, in the forests, don't have to be cut back. But I know a lot of people who do have sword ferns in their gardens, close up, and they'll shear those old fronds off in like December or January, so that they can really see the fiddleheads. Because and they're almost all done now, but some ferns still have a little fiddlehead coming out. That's almost as good as those baby eggs that I have. They're so precious this time of year. And so, they don't care about the old fronds, like they wanna shear this back so they can see the fiddleheads coming out. So fern, I love ferns. Sun ferns, most of them are in the shade or part shade, but, that's a fern, but with, decoration in there, but I love that combination because it's like, oh, that's a boring green fern, but then they put these little glass swirly bits in there, which I thought was really fun. I love the Fatzias, those are great. I love the yellow variegation, especially in our winters because of gray and boring for months at a time. And so these are all like the bright and the shiny. The grass on the end is the Japanese forest grass, which is a deciduous grass. And so that is gonna die back in the winter, but all summer long, these fronds, unless you have dogs, because the dogs will eat these, and the rabbits sometimes will eat these down to the, the cat, yes, my cat will eat yes, true. So you just have to plant a lot, is basically the solution there. So obviously, this is not an exhaustive plant list, right? Because we could just go on and on and on plants. But I did want to share, like, the ferns are really helpful, I think. Some of the native shrubs, as long as you don't go crazy and plant all natives, because I just think it gets too unruly in our urban environment. Unless you have a property, like if you have property somewhere and you have acreage, native plants all the way. Like just do all of that because it's so beneficial for everything. And then, so.
I was just gonna ask, in that middle picture, what
Yeah.
is with the Fatsia there? That's a nice combination.
Yeah, so the Fatsia, the red leaf in the front is Persicaria. I don't know, Persicaria. I never know the.
Sorry, the internet will know.
Yes, thank you. And then the other bright one in the front, I think is probably an epimedium, which again, another interesting foliage. They have cute flowers that are out right now, coming right now, is the epimedium flowers, which are little dainty things that look like orchids, some of them, most of them, but they also have really cool foliage year round, and so even when the flowers go. It could be that it's a violet, it could be that it's some other ground color that I just don't know what it is. I love the combination though, right? Because the Fatsia is like a big shrub, and that's evergreen. And so if you put that in a shady corner, it like pops, right? The Persicaria, which is a little bit of red, you can get that in other plants, right? It doesn't have to be the Persicaria. This is a summer photo too, so I think the Persicarias go down in the winter, but there are other plants, right? So you see the foliage, texture, different shapes, and it's all kind of color palette pleasing, right? So, and then this last one, and then so I wanted to know if anybody had a favorite plant that they love, that they've used, that they like, oh my gosh, it's a workhorse or it does everything for me.
I really like the smoke bush.
Right?
Yeah,
I love the smoke bush.
Yeah.
I just bought 2 at this plant sale, I went to this last weekend, cardoons, which are like the ornamental artichoke plants,
Uh-huh.
and they're silver. And then they come out with these giant like artichoke looking flowers that are covered in bees to put right in front of the smoke bush.
Oh,
So again, kind of contrast and pop of color and lots of bees, and the smoke bushes are great. They're purple, but you can also get the gold one.
yeah.
Yeah, so those are really good stalwart plants, yeah. Anybody else?
The forest pansy tree.
Yes, the cercis, yes, that's a great tree. How big is yours?
They get too big, but
They
they're
get big.
beautiful.
They're really pretty, that dark purple heart-shaped leaf, oh, yeah. Actually, you know what, there's, some up in the arboretum. If you go up the backside, if you're walking from, like, the Japanese garden back to that Pacific Rim area of the arboretum, there's some, not the Cercis forest pansy, but there's another smaller shrub called the Dizianthus. No, that's not right. Dianthus? No, that's not right. It's D-I-S. I can't remember the exact quote. If you text me, I'll get it to you. But anyway, it's a smaller, it looks like a Cercis. It looks like the forest pansy, but it's not. And, but it can be smaller in your garden. So that's another thing. So I can throw, okay, everybody close your eyes and I'm just like, it's gonna be right. So any questions that, I'm so glad you guys asked me questions on the way.
Do you have a pottery? I'm trying to find some good pots.
Right?
Like, is there?
Gosh, and so many of our nurseries are closing, and so many of our pot stores are closing, these pots, containers. We're getting the other pots.
I know. Containers.
Right, containers. So, there's still nurseries around, obviously Swanson's has a big container section. Wells Medina does not sell containers. Well, I don't know. I think they have a small section of containers over there. Really, the best place that I know that has like all containers is up in Linwood.
Is it that Pottery World?
Pottery World, Pottery Land, something like that, yeah. If you're almost at Alderwood Mall.
Okay.
So it's like it's the exit after 196. So it's the next one, like as if you're across from the mall. That Pottery Land place is probably the biggest potluck. And there's a couple in the south end, like down in Georgetown and down farther, and a couple over on 405. But they're a ways away.
Yeah, I know, there's nothing, right?
And nothing close up, I mean, Ravenna Gardens is great, there's just, you know, Ravenna, I mean, that's our closest urban little store that has like everything.
Yeah.
And, it's a great store, I love that store to bits, it's
Do
really.
you think they do the landscaping in the, like?
They don't,
They
no,
don't?
it's
Does it?
a different company, yeah, it's a different company, cause they do all the maintenance and all.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ravenna just does right around their store, yeah, but it's a great place to go. And the other city peoples, like the one over on Sandpoint, they have some stuff too.
Is that still open?
The one on Sandpoint is, oh gosh, I don't know.
Yeah, it's not as much of a nursery, it's more.
No,
like
it's
a
store, yeah.
retail, yeah, right.
But they do have the garden center out back, so
Yeah,
it's not as big as what it is.
I hated that song.
Everybody, trust me, like everybody does, so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I have cards, if you wanna pick up a card, find me on the internet, find me in all the places. If you need more help, or if there are other questions, feel free to text me or email me, cause I'm, having seen you guys here tonight.